Okay. The signal went from Bern to Jerusalem, back to Switzerland, and it takes a while. So, okay. Shalom, dear Holocaust survivors, Your Excellencies, dear patrons, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, guten Abend. Thank you all for being with us this evening. We extend our special appreciation to all of you who contributed to this event. My name is Ariel Rosenstein. I serve as Deputy Ambassador of Israel in Switzerland. I am honored to welcome you all to this commemoration ceremony on the occasion of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day 2021. In this year's memorial program, we pay special tribute to the Swiss Holocaust survivors. I would like to invite you all to stand as we hold a minute of silence to honor the memory of the victims of the Shoah. Thank you. We begin with a prayer remembering the victims of the Shoah. El Malei Rachamim, read by Rabbi Michael Cohen of the Jewish community of Bern.
El Malei Rachamim, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. לנשמות 6 מיליוני היהודים מחללי השואה באירופה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, שנטבעו, שנחנקו, ושנספו על קידוש השם. באושוויץ, ברגן-בלזן, מיידנק, טרבלינקה, ובשאר מחנות ההשמדה. בעבור שכל הקהל מתפלל לעילוי נשמותיהם, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימין, ונאמר אמן.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohen. The first speaker this evening will be the Ambassador of the State of Israel, His Excellency, Mr. Jacob Kedal.
Dear Holocaust survivors, dear Mr. Abbey, President of the National Council, dear Dr. Levine, President of the Federation of Jewish Communities, dear Rabbi Cohn, dear Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Swiss government officials, representatives of Jewish communities, dear patrons, ladies and gentlemen, I am very honored to speak before you. Being myself a son of Holocaust survivors, I am humbled to speak at the presence, online, of Holocaust survivors and their families, and to listen later to the testimony of Professor Loeb. We are in physical distance, but we are together in spirit. Dear friends, the International Holocaust Remembrance Day marks the day back in 1945 when the Red Army liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau. It commemorates the Shoah that resulted in the murder of 6 million Jews. Many millions of people were the victims of the Nazis, but the only people that the Nazis and their collaborators targeted for total annihilation were the Jews. The essence of this Remembrance Day is to honor the memory of Holocaust victims, to educate about Holocaust history, and to prevent future acts of genocide. Today we honor and remember the Swiss Holocaust survivors, those that are with us and those who are no longer. I would like to cite Swiss Ambassador Benno Bettig when he chaired the IRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, 3 years ago. We need education on the Holocaust to be aware of the truth, to learn how to establish facts and track falsification, to fight Holocaust denial but also Holocaust distortion. End of quote. When it comes to fighting Holocaust denial and distortion, to fight anti-Semitism, to help Holocaust survivors and to educate future generations, Israel, its government and organizations pledge to continue with our tireless efforts. In this regard, we have to mention the important work that the Swiss Federation of the Jewish Communities, as well as the various organizations, including, for example, the GRA, CICAD, and the Swiss Association of Jewish Care Organizations, are doing all around Switzerland. I would like to highlight 2 examples of efforts to increase awareness among the young generation. The Memoirs of Holocaust Survivors, edited by Professor Ivan Levkovich and funded by the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, as well as the exhibition The Last Swiss Holocaust Survivors, initiated by Anita Winter and the Gamral Foundation. Parts of that exhibition were just recently integrated by the National Museum in Zurich. For the first time, testimonies of Swiss Holocaust survivors were added to the permanent exhibition. We cannot talk about the theme that was chosen for this event without mentioning the 49 Swiss righteous among the nations, honored by Yad Vashem. Each one of them saved so many people and deserves our eternal gratitude. For example, the Swiss consul in Budapest, Karl Lutz, and Paul Gruninger, the Swiss police commander. In honor of the Swiss Holocaust survivors, in memory of all the Holocaust victims, let us unite to make our world a better place where people respect each other, extend a helping hand in times of need, and live in peace. I wish all of you to stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kedal. I invite to the podium the Chargée d'Affaires of the United States of America, Mrs. Eva Weingold Schultz.
Thank you, President Eby, President Leuven, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Each year, we come together to remember the horrors unveiled with the liberation of Auschwitz and the state in 1945. Each year, we honor the victims, the survivors, and the righteous among nations. It is a profound personal honor for me to be part of this commemoration today. We continue to speak of these atrocities decades later because we must ensure they are never repeated. At the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., there is an absolutely heartbreaking quote from Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner Elie Wiesel, which has stayed with me from the first time I read it. The terrible image says it all, quote, "Never shall I forget the little faces of the children whose bodies I saw turned into wreaths of smoke beneath the silent blue sky," end quote. Unfortunately, 2020's global pandemic, racial turmoil, and continued violence and instability reminds us we are one world community which must rise to these challenges together. Our shared destiny transcends anything that might appear to divide us, and we must continue to strive for the safety, security, and protection of human rights for all. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to honor the survivors we recognize today. You have lived through unspeakable brutality, yet continue to represent the very best of humankind. Your living testimony is an inspiring example of resilience and human dignity. I also want to honor the legacy and memory of the Holocaust survivors who passed away in the last year. They shared their experiences with us and taught us to never take basic human rights for granted. We owe great debt to the Gamarl Foundation and to everyone who has dedicated themselves to ensuring survivors' testimony is recorded and preserved for generations to come. The legacy of the Holocaust also continues to guide the actions of my government today. In July, the U.S. Department of State released a new report called the Just Act Report, which highlights actions by countries around the world to commemorate the Holocaust, provide compensation for confiscated property, and promote Holocaust education. This report is an important tool to provide the best practices and also to detail the work which remains to be done. And in September, the United States signed a historic joint statement with Israel, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the United Emirates. The Abraham Accords were the first public normalization of relations between Israel and an Arab country in a generation. Sudan and the Kingdom of Morocco later followed in also normalizing their relations with Israel. The Accords enshrined the importance of, and I quote, tolerance and respect for every person in order to make this world a place where all can enjoy a life of dignity and hope, no matter their race, faith, or ethnicity, end quote. International Holocaust Remembrance Day is a day to educate our children and our citizens about the facts of the Holocaust. It is a day to reflect on the enduring need for vigilance to protect human dignity. And it is a day to honor the legacy of all survivors, living and deceased, and to renew our commitment to tolerance and peace. Thank you again for the honor of participating in this commemoration today.
Thank you, Mrs. Weigold-Schultz. Let us welcome the distinguished President of the Swiss National Council, Mr. Andreas Ebi, to speak. I invite you to the podium.
Dear Professor Loeb, dear Dr. Levine, dear ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, since 2005, on the 27th of January, we commemorate the 6 million Jews, Sinti, Roma, the Yenish, homosexuals, political resistance fighters, and all other victims and survivors of the Holocaust. We will learn that also Swiss men and women were interned in concentration camps, and not few of them perished by the inhuman practices of the Nazis. I think it is very important that particularly on this day we honor their memory and remember what may never again occur.
This place where over 1 million men, women and children lost their lives stands as a symbol for the barbaric crimes committed by the extermination policy of the Nazis. In my role as President of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I visit the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Site with a parliamentary delegation in 2013. I listened to the victims' harrowing testimonies. I saw the oppressively camped prisoner barracks, the crematoria and the gas chamber ruins. The horrors committed there will still palpable, and dark shadows of the lingered everywhere. Bei der anschließenden Kranzniederlegung
At the adjacent wreath-laying ceremonies at the end of the visit, I thought to myself in silence what I want to tell you, dear ladies and gentlemen, now loud and clearly. Never again may deviation from the norm be threatened by violence. Never again may people, based on their political opinion, need to fear persecution. Never again may faith or ethical belonging lead to a deprivation of rights, displacement and murder. Yes, these atrocities, which were committed today 76 years ago, with the liberation of the concentration camp Auschwitz-Birkenau, which ended then, may never again be repeated. The horror committed by these inconceivable crimes of the Nazi regime throw us into a type of speechlessness and disbelief, but we may not be quiet. Auschwitz is there to exhort us, to keep alive this memory of one of the darkest hours of human history, and to transmit this from generation to generation. In this sense, I'm very happy about the existence of such commemorative events as today's, which permit the survivors to express themselves and to share their history with us. We have to continue to speak of the wrong which was committed, and we have to maintain a critical eye on what has passed. It is only thus that we will be able to understand the errors of the past and to draw the conclusions in order for the present to be peaceful and our future better. We all can contribute that this call, never again Auschwitz, may remain a reality. For me, particularly also in my role as President of the Swiss National Council, it is important that we watch our tone in political debate. We may have differing opinions, we may argue in a tough manner, but the political opponent deserves respect. Who attacks dissidents personally, shouts them down, or even threatens them, he endangers our liberal democracy. Let us give caution to our political culture by encountering each other with dignity, tolerance, and empathy. Let us uphold values such as freedom, legal certainty, equality. Let us fight racism, anti-Semitism, and hatred by calling out together, never again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, National Councillor Ebi. I now invite the President of the Swiss Federation of Jewish Communities, Dr. Ralph Levin, to the stage.
Dear Professor Loeb, dear Mr. President of the Swiss National Council, Your Excellencies, Kvod Harav, dear ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to speak here today as President of the Swiss Federation of Jewish Communities. Of course, I would have preferred to do this in a hall full of people. However, we find ourselves now in special and difficult times. Unfortunately, the Jewish population is not only threatened by the coronavirus, also the virus which we are familiar with for much longer already by the name of anti-Semitism is an additional threat. Also in Switzerland, we have to state that anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in the context with the corona pandemic are gaining support. No matter if it's the pest, war, economic crisis, or worldwide pandemic, For certain people, the ones to blame are always clear in advance. Therefore, it is all the more important that we are always aware of two things. First of all, anti-Semitism, but also any hatred towards any minority may always and everywhere needs to be contradicted. And secondly, we may never forget what anti-Semitic words can lead to discrimination, marginalization, displacement, and murder. Today, we will hear reports from 3 men who experienced this in the most painful personal manner. First of all, Professor Dr. Ladislav Loeb will be speaking to us directly. And on the other hand, we will hear video recordings of Eduard Kornfeld and Gabor Hirsch, who unfortunately have been taken from us last year. With both of them, the Jewish Federation of Jewish Communities maintained close relations. All 3 men, up until their high age, never ceased to relate their stories to school classes, at speeches, and in commemorative events such as this one today. They did not only share their own story, but also the story of those people who no longer could share it themselves. They overcame the Nazis in 3 manners. They survived, they established own families and thus contributed to the continuation of the Jewish population. And they did not allow that the memory of the 6 million dead would fade away. As we all know, reports of Holocaust survivors were and are enormously important, if not the most important, for the commemorative work. However, unfortunately, in future, there will be no more people who can share their experiences of the Holocaust with us. We will have to find new methods and means how we and our descendants can continue to remember and thus contribute that it may never occur again. Also in Switzerland, such considerations and initiatives are taking place, which we strongly support. Particularly important, but also very demanding, is that with these measures, we need to appeal and address young people. It is very difficult because the young people are daily occupied with completely other topics, for example, on social media. And they are no longer familiar with the tragic events, not even by hearsay. I hope that we will succeed in doing so with this commemorative work which we all have to pursue, that we will succeed to also address the young generation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Levin. Mrs. Nicolina Pinko Burns is an opera singer originally from Zagreb, Croatia. Graduated of the Music Academy of Zagreb. To date, she has performed solo recitals in Europe and beyond. Among her prize-winning performances, the international singing competition Bruna Spieler in March 2011, she will sing Shema Yisrael and Yaseh Shalom.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai
and promote Holocaust education, remembrance, and research worldwide. I invite the Ambassador of Germany, His Excellency Michael Pfluger, to the podium.
Sehr geehrter Ehrengast,
Dear honorary guests, please. To us. Upon initiative of the German chair, for the first time, the UN, the UNESCO, and the IRA will commemorate the International Holocaust Memorial Day together. UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres, UNESCO General Director Azulay, by Nazi Germany on millions of people. Jews, Sinti and Roma, people with disabilities, and political dissidents. The survivors of the Holocaust play a central role to remember and remind of the dreadful occurrences. For years, they have tirelessly reminded us against the forgetting. However, as Dr. Levine has just said, in Bern, the topic of uphold the memory. Without contemporary witnesses, it will get more and more difficult to keep the memory alive also in future generations. But there are also examples that demonstrate the opposite. About 15 years ago, when I was in London as press speaker of the German embassy, an Israeli student contacted me for his research project. He wanted to know from me how I responsibility for us and warning at the same time. Every day to stand up newly against the discrimination of people who, based on their religion or any other characteristics, are being persecuted, and to turn against crimes committed against humanity. For Germany and the German foreign policy today, the terrible events under the Nazis are the most important motivation to stand up against fascism and dictatorships and to stand for democracy, human rights and freedom worldwide. Therefore, Germany is engaged for a world that remembers the Holocaust and for a world without genocide. During the IRA presidency, which Germany has held from March 2020 to February of this year, our focus was particularly on contradicting relativizations and falsifications of the Holocaust. While chairing the IRA, we promoted diverse projects in order to fight anti-Semitism and anti-Ziganism and to uphold Holocaust memory. We are deeply worried about dreadful acts of anti-Semitism and renewed right-wing extremism also in Germany. We find ourselves at a critical point. The number of anti-Semitic assaults has strongly increased over the last years. We're not only experiencing assaults, but we also have to recognize that the social media are used increasingly to spread anti-Semitic hate speech. This places the society before new challenges. It remains our all responsibility that such a genocide may never repeat itself. Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor the life and work of Holocaust survivors. We bow before the deceased and commemorate particularly those who have just left us recently, the Swiss Holocaust survivors Gabor Hirsch and Eduard Kornfeld. It is a great joy in the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen. He came to Switzerland, studied in the 50s German and English in Zurich. He described his survival in the book Dealing with Satan, Reger Kastner's daring rescue mission. So Mrs. Winter for the excellent cooperation and for all her involvement. Dear Professor Loeb, we are deeply grateful to you that you will share your experiences with us today, and with your witness, your testimony, you will contribute that the crime of the Holocaust may never
Ambassador Pfluger. As introduced by Ambassador Pfluger, please join us in watching the video testimony of Professor Ladislav Loeb.
gentlemen, because for me it is a great honor to speak here about my experiences as an 11-year-old child in the concentration camp. Hungary. My father was a businessman. My mother suffered of tuberculosis and she passed away when I was about 9 years old. Hungary was the most anti-Semitic country of which made life for the Jews very difficult. But that was nothing compared to what was yet to soon come. In March 1944, Hitler's troops marched into Hungary. Hungarian Jews. If we were outside, we had to wear the yellow star. And we were soon brought to the ghetto. The ghetto was actually a brick factory which was no longer in use. The ghetto. by brutal policemen. When we arrived at the ghetto, you had to forget everything. Brought by freight trains to Eastern Europe, to Auschwitz. I say we here. That was my entire family. Uncles, aunts, grandmother, grandfather, and so on. With one exception, my father. Survivors after the war. There was a very sad scene. An anecdote, though I may not call it an anecdote. When the Jews arrived in Auschwitz, they always had to walk past an he would send them capable of working to the other side. Amongst them was my young aunt. She was the younger sister of my mother, who during her disease had cared for me. Her parents were sent by this SS doctor to join her parents, to go with her parents. He very indifferently said, okay, and my young aunt joined her parents, who were on the way to where the doctor had sent them. Building was nothing. There my young aunt passed away. My father and I were, like I had already said, not there, because we had managed to flee from the ghetto. My father had achieved this with from the ghetto. And we managed to take a train direction the capital city of Budapest. Because the deportations had started in the province, life in Budapest was to hide in his clinic. But unfortunately, after a few days he had to send us away again, because too many detectives had knocked at his door and searched for Jews. So we found ourselves in the street place in the university building. But my father had the intuition that he did not like the suggestion, and he turned it down. After the war, we heard that a bomb had which was of Rege Kastner, and he was a Zionist leader, also from Transylvania, Siebenbürgen, like I, and he he succeeded in persuading one of the leaders of this group to let us join them. And the plan was that a group of about 1,700 Jews from a ransom of and would be able to continue on to Palestine. And so my father and I joined this group. We were accepted by them. 44. We were heading to Palestine. The train, however, then soon stopped and stood for 3 days on a meadow. Rumors came up that we were not going to Palestine, which was true. But what was not true in 1944, Germany, in the Lüneburger Heide, at a concrete train platform. There was nothing else there, where terrible, about 7 kilometers further on. And there we stood suddenly in front of a concentration camp. I don't need to describe it any further to you. That was Bergen-Belsen. Of Germany. Built for 5,000 prisoners. But gradually, because the war was not going well for the Germans, 50,000 Jews were then imprisoned there. Without water. By the Germans. No purpose, and they died. Approximately 50,000 died in those last war months there. But, like I said, my father and I were no longer there. We were no longer there. The Bodensee, then as well as today, was the border between Germany and Switzerland. So we were there. Germany was completely cloaked bombs over Switzerland instead of Germany. So we were there in Switzerland, in Lustenau. We had to transit from a German train, a cold, dark, shabby train, to a Swiss train, which brought us to St. Margrethen. From St. Margrethen, we were then escorted to St. Gallen, to a warm, brightly illuminated gym hall with soft mattresses. In the middle of the night, we were served breakfast and we were saved. From St. Gallen, we were then taken across Switzerland to Kohl, a village approximately 1,000 meters above the Lake of Geneva. in the Bernese Oberland, a so-called anti-authority school, where I spent 2 years as a child. In these 2 years, I gradually lost my fears and became a human being again. Unfortunately, my father discovered that I was not learning enough there. And so he took me out of the school where I had been very happy. He succeeded that with Jewish support, I could come to Zurich, to the Swiss high school, where I at first was quite unhappy, but gradually I adapted and I made Swiss-German friends, etc. Finally, I graduated, I did the Swiss graduation, and after years of complete disinterest in Jewish topics, I also gradually came closer again to Judaism. But for 1 year, I then left for England, where I had a position as a German lecturer. The 1 year turned into more than 50 years. I remained in England, married, had 2 daughters, was promoted to professor, until upon my retirement, I decided not to stay in England after all. And Brexit had something to do with this decision. But in any case, in April 2017, I then came with my wife to Zurich and felt very much at home in Zurich again. Back in Zurich, I had the great fortune to get to know Anita Winter. She did not only welcome me to my second life in Zurich with all warmth, but I also had the joy to see that we are both of the same conviction that the Holocaust may never be repeated. In order to achieve this, we have to remember the Holocaust. So it is our duty, together as much as possible, to work towards that the Holocaust may never go forgotten, and we actively need to pursue ways to work effectively against racism and genocide. If you want to hear more about my life, I have written this book. It is called Dealing with the Satan. It was published about 10 years ago. I think it is still very contemporary. There is also a website where you can learn more about me, but at the moment I think I shall cease to speak about myself, and I want to thank you for your interest and for your friendly and kind attention. Goodbye and thank you.
Thank you, Professor Loeb, for your moving testimony. We will now conclude the commemoration ceremony with a prayer in remembrance of the Holocaust victims, Kaddish, read by Rabbi Cohen.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דברי חילותי והמליך מלכותי, בחי איכון וביום איכון ובחי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי די קודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Thank you all for your participation. We apologize for the technical difficulties. The ceremony was recorded with English, German, and French interpretations. We will share the recording of the ceremony in all languages as soon as we can. We ask you to remain with us for a few more minutes to watch a short film created by the Gamaral Foundation. This segment offers partial testimonies by two Swiss Holocaust survivors, Mr. Gabo Hirsch and Edward Kornfeld. Both passed away in the year 2020. May their memories be blessed. Yehi Zichram Baruch. Toda and Shalom.
Also ich glaube, die einzige, was ich weitergeben kann, dass man sollte aufpassen, man sollte schauen, wozu eigentlich Rassismus führen kann. Wenn wir schauen, was eigentlich heute alles passiert, dann sehen wir, dass die Leute aus dieser Vergangenheit nicht viel gelernt haben.
%, wurden sofort vergast. Also ich war schon von die 25. Und dann noch Mengele, verstehen Sie, sofort.
Meine Mutter ist eigentlich mit mir dann nach Auschwitz gekommen. Also wir wurden dann getrennt. Ich habe sie später zweimal gesehen. Wir hatten mal eine Arbeit erledigen müssen. Wir haben Grasziegel gestochen hinter die Frauenlager und bei dieser Gelegenheit habe ich meine Mutter mal getroffen. Einmal könnte vielleicht im Juli gewesen sein und zweite Mal müsste es eigentlich im August sein. Und zweite Mal, dann wusste ich glaube, dass es um diese Arbeit oder diese Kommando gehen wird und ich könnte mir eine Portion Brot organisieren. Ich wollte es meiner Mutter geben und anstatt ich ihr mein Butter gab, hat sie eigentlich ihre Portion Brot mir gegeben. Das war eigentlich auch das letzte Mal, dass ich meine Mutter gesehen habe. Ja, nicht also. Ich könnte meine Mutter kaum erkennen. Sie war kurzgeschoren, mit Dings, abgemagert. Es war ein fürchterliches Bild, glaube ich. Aber ich denke gar nicht gerne zurück auf diese Zeit.
Ich will mich zusammenprügeln, sagt der Oberst, er bekommt ein Weihnachtsgeschenk. Nach 5 Schlägen nichts. Kein Gefühl, ich habe so nichts mehr. Aber ich habe mir gedacht, lieber schreie ich weiter, nicht, dass er mir gibt noch 15 oder wie viel, oder also 25. Und nachdem es fertig war, jetzt bricht von mir raus ein Wahnsinnslachen. Das kann man sich nicht erklären. Und dann kommt der oberste SS, der höchste, der Kommandant vom Ganzen, und packt mich am Kragen, legt mich auf die Tote drauf. Ja? Und ich will runter. Du bleibst oben, du bist sowieso bald so weit. Da habe ich geschaltet, wenn ich jetzt noch eine Bewegung mache, dann geht er mir nach und tut mich in Grab. Ja? Und ich war schon dabei aufzugeben.
24. Januar sind einige Soldaten gekommen, das war von der Todkommando. Ihre Aufgabe war, die Spuren zu vernichten. Sie haben dann die sogenannte Effektenlager angezündet. Sie haben dann die Krematorium mal gesprengt und sie haben für uns angegeben, dass nächster Tag alle Juden antreten. Man sollte eigentlich uns abführen.
Ein Vorarbeiter sagt, nimm dich zusammen, es geht nicht mehr lange. Habe ich mich, weil wenn man sich hingefallen ist, man hat keine Schmerzen mehr, man war nicht kalt, es war im Winter, nur zum Kurz. Also gut, und das Wunder war, man hat Nachschub verlangt von Dachau, sie haben keine geschickt, hat man liquidiertes Lager, mich auch, und ich bin gekommen nach Dachau.
Ich habe mich dann versteckt unter die Matratze im Spitallager und 3 Tage später sind dann die Russen gekommen und haben uns befreit.
Und Leute, die am Sterben waren schon, am Sterben, sind noch gekrochen am Boden zu sehen, die Befreiung. Es ist unvorstellbar, diese Befreiung. Und manche sind gesprungen, wo konnten noch auf die Tanks, sind überfahren worden. Also es war eine unglaublich, das kann man sich nicht vorstellen. Und dann haben die Amerikaner eine Rede gehalten. Was haben wir bekommen? Bohnen mit Speck.
Also ich war 15 Jahre und 1,5 Monate alt.
Und in die Schweiz kam ich 1949, August. Dann habe ich durch einen Freund bekommen eine Stelle, eine Lehre als Juwelenfasser. Hat man eingereicht, Juwelenfasser. Auf dem darauf kriege ich einen Brief von Dr. Rothmund, ich soll binnen 3 Monate die Schweiz verlassen. Und damals, was Rothmund unterschrieben hat, er war doch der J-Pass, wissen Sie, J in die deutsche Pässe verhandelt hat mit den Deutschen. Wusste ich, kein Mensch kann das aufheben. Bin ich runtergefahren nach Bern, geht zum Bern, der Concierge, wo wollen Sie, Dr. Rothmund? Dr. Rothmund, 333, weiß ich ungefähr. Und ich komme an, dort klopfe ich, das ist eine Sekretärin, was wünschen Sie? Ich möchte zu Dr. Rothmund. Ich möchte Sie nicht beleidigen, das ist aber ausgeschlossen, zu Dr. Rothmund gibt es keinen Passantenverkehr. Gibt es nicht, unmöglich. Sagt sie, aber wissen Sie, wenn Sie brauchen Hilfe, ich kenne Herrn Doktor so und so, an Doktor so und so, an Doktor so und so. Ich habe etwas gelernt. Zu Schreibtischtäter muss man persönlich, das ist die einzige Chance. Verstehen Sie? Weil dann sind Sie ganz anders. Ich habe ein SS nie in den Augen geschaut. Nie. Und die in Dachau, die Chefin, das hat sie auch noch nie gehört, die Frau Doktor so und so. Warum? Weil wenn Sie geschaut haben, SS, kann er Sie rausnehmen, so, verstehen Sie, wenn er will, dann verschießt er Sie. Ich wusste nicht, also ich habe immer in Lehre geschaut, ich habe psychologisch erfasst die Situationen in Ungarn, überall.
Also man hat relativ wenig über die Vergangenheit gesprochen. Ich habe insofern verarbeitet, dass ich versuchte eigentlich in Archiv und so weiter nachzusuchen. Mir war es wichtig, dass ich mehr oder weniger schwarz auf weiß weiß, was mit mir passierte. Die Albträume und so weiter vermischen sich. Und darum wollte ich mich eigentlich vergewissern, wie weit ich zuverlässig bin in meiner Erinnerung.
Es gibt gute Menschen, Aber man muss das Schlechte bekämpfen, hinterfragen. Wie konnte so ein kultiviertes Volk wie Deutschland, so einen verrückten, ohne Hinterfragen studierte Menschen, dieser Mord, 50 Millionen Menschen sind umgekommen. Warum? Weil sie haben nicht hinterfragt. Man muss hinterfragen alles. Ich hinterfrage alles. Sogar bei Ärzten frage ich, sagen sie, warum so und warum nicht anders? Ja? So bin ich schon Operationen auch entgangen. Verstehen Sie? Ich will nur sagen, man muss hinterfragen. Und das sage ich den Jugendlichen. 2, kein Mitläufer sein. Kein Mitläufer. Nur weil der ist, mache ich das auch. Weil der ein Nazi ist oder der das ist. Man muss eine eigene Meinung haben.